Hello everyone! Welcome to Untold History, where we unearth the lesser-known but crucial events of world history. Today we move to Northern Europe to explore a key episode that influenced the course of the Great Northern War, the Siege of Nöteborg. The Great Northern War was a conflict that lasted more than 20 years and involved several European powers, including Sweden, Russia, Denmark, Norway, and the Polish-Lithuanian Confederation, among others, and transformed the balance of power in Northern and Eastern Europe. The center of this conflict was Sweden, a power that had consolidated its control over the Baltic Sea during the 16th and 17th centuries, becoming a dominant kingdom in the region. Under the leadership of a series of militarily successful kings, it had expanded its territory through victories in wars against Denmark, Poland, and Russia, which gave it a key strategic position in the control of vital trade routes and territories. On the other side was Russia, an emerging nation led by Tsar Peter the Great, who had inherited a kingdom that, though vast in extent, was lagging behind the European powers in terms of military technology, industry, and administration. Peter's ambition was to modernize Russia on the Western model, and his first goal was to obtain an outlet to the Baltic Sea, which would allow him to trade more easily with Europe and project Russian power over the continent. The Nöteborg fortress, which guarded the mouth of the Neva River in the Gulf of Finland, was a vital stronghold for the Swedes, as it controlled access to the Baltic Sea and defended the region where Peter the Great had a vision to build a new city, St. Petersburg, which was intended to be Russia's window to Europe. This river was essential not only for commercial reasons but also for military reasons. Throughout the 17th century, both Swedes and Russians had understood the importance of controlling this watercourse, which connects Lakes Ladoga and Onega with the Baltic. For Sweden, the fortress guaranteed control of Ingria, a strategic region that had been Swedish since the Peace of Stalbovo in 1617, after the previous war with Russia. For Pedro, seizing the fortress meant the beginning of his project to found a modern, industrial, and militarily strong capital. The Siege of Nöteborg was part of a wider campaign by Peter to displace Sweden from the Baltic. After the initial defeat of Russian forces at the Battle of Narva in 1700, he had learned valuable lessons about the need to modernize his army. By the autumn of 1702, he was ready to launch his assault on the Swedish fortress. He knew that this siege would not only be a military challenge, but also a symbol to show his nation's advance. Under the leadership of Peter himself, Russian forces, consisting of about 20,000 soldiers, headed towards Neva in September. The Russian army included infantry, cavalry, and most importantly, powerful artillery, which Peter had deemed crucial in breaking through the fortress's defenses. For its part, the Swedish garrison in the fortress, although small, was well-equipped and led by experienced officers. Composed of about 600 to 700 men, it had reinforced the fortress's defenses and was prepared to withstand a prolonged siege. The Swedes were confident that winter, with its frigid temperatures and difficult terrain, would weaken the Russians before they could take the fortress. The siege began in the first week of October 1702. Russian troops set up their guns at a safe distance and began shelling the fortress walls. The bombardment was constant, gradually weakening the Swedish defenses. However, the Swedes offered fierce resistance. From inside the fortress, the defenders responded with their own artillery, and although they were outnumbered, they managed to delay the Russian advance for several weeks. The walls, built of robust materials, held out for longer than expected, allowing the Swedes to maintain control. Pedro, determined not to make mistakes, kept up the pressure. Their strategy included not only constant bombardment but also a series of surprise attacks. Weather conditions also played a crucial role. Cold began to affect both the Swedish defenders and the Russian troops. However, Pedro had better prepared his men to withstand the harsh conditions. After several weeks of siege and with the Swedish defenses seriously compromised, Peter decided to launch a final attack in the early morning of October 11, 1702. Russian troops, after heavy shelling throughout the night, launched a massive assault on the weakened walls. Eventually, the fortress of Nöteborg fell into Russian hands. Swedish troops who had not fallen in combat were taken prisoner. Peter, in a symbolic gesture, entered the fortress and personally supervised the taking of the bastion. The victory was celebrated in Russia as a historic milestone. Not only did it mean control of a key fortress, but it also meant Peter's first major military success in the Great Northern War. Capture of the fortress was a turning point in this war. From a strategic point of view, the Russian victory was significant because it allowed Peter the Great to secure access to the Baltic Sea, one of his main ambitions. With the fortress under Russian control, he proceeded to consolidate his presence in the region, and a few months later, in 1703, he founded the city of St. Petersburg. This new capital became the symbol of Russia's modernization and the country's window to Europe. On the other hand, the defeat in Neva was a heavy blow for Sweden. Although they remained a power, the loss of the fortress represented the beginning of the decline of the Swedish Empire in the Baltic region. Charles XII of Sweden, who was immersed in campaigns in Poland at the time, would be forced to divert resources and troops to contain the Russian advance in Ingria and Karelia, thus weakening his ability to maintain absolute control over his territories. Over the next few years, the Russian advance in the Baltic region accelerated. Following this victory, Peter captured other strategic positions, and by 1710, most of the former Swedish positions in the eastern Baltic had fallen under Russian control. Although the war would continue until 1721, the victory at Neva laid the groundwork for Russian dominance in the Baltic. This event is not only an episode of the Great Northern War, but also a milestone in the history of Russian expansion and its consolidation as a European power. The founding of St. Petersburg on the banks of the river marked the birth of a city that would become the capital of the Russian Empire for more than 2 centuries. This city became a cultural, military, and commercial center, connecting Russia with the rest of Europe. On the other hand, for Sweden, the loss of Neva and the eventual defeat in the Great Northern War meant the end of its status as the dominant power in Northern Europe. With the Treaty of Nystad in 1721, which ended the war, Sweden ceded its Baltic territories to Russia, cementing Russia's rise as the new power in the region and the decline of the Swedish Empire. This event was a watershed moment in the history of Northern Europe. While it allowed Peter the Great to secure control of the Baltic and continue his project of modernizing Russia, for Sweden it was the first step towards a decline that would end Swedish hegemony in the region. Thank you for joining us for this review of the Siege of Nöteborg. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell for more untold stories. See you next time.